The most dangerous lie is not the one someone tells you. It is the one you keep telling yourself long after the truth is trying to be heard. Victoria Mercer heard Ethan's voice before she saw him. Her son stood in the doorway of her corner office high above Palo Alto, sunlight reflecting off the glass towers surrounding Mercer Capital. At 35, Ethan had built a successful artificial intelligence company and earned the respect of people across Silicon Valley. Yet at that moment he looked less like an executive and more like a hopeful son waiting for his mother's approval. He smiled and told her he wanted to marry Emily Carter. For a brief second, Victoria smiled back. Then the name settled into her chest and awakened something she had spent 12 years trying to control. Fear. Not fear of Emily. Fear of history. After Ethan left, Victoria remained alone in the office. She opened a locked drawer hidden inside her desk and removed a worn recipe page folded carefully inside a protective sleeve. The paper belonged to Sarah Mercer. Coffee stains marked the corners. Handwritten corrections crossed out ingredients. A note in the margin read, "Mom burned this one again." Victoria's lips curved into a small smile despite herself. For a moment she remembered family dinners, laughter, arguments, and ordinary happiness. Then the memory shifted. Sarah's face faded. Ryan Cole's face appeared. The charming son-in-law who had once seemed trustworthy. The man whose betrayal had nearly destroyed everything. Victoria returned the page to the drawer and called the family attorneys. If Ethan was going to marry Emily, protections would be required. Hours later Emily arrived at Mercer Capital expecting a welcoming conversation. Instead she found herself seated inside a conference room surrounded by legal advisors and stacks of documents. Confidentiality agreements. Asset protection provisions. Family governance requirements. Emily listened politely, but every page felt less like an invitation and more like a warning. Across the table, Victoria remained calm and professional. Ethan tried to lighten the atmosphere, but the tension never disappeared. Emily studied Victoria carefully and reached a conclusion. This woman did not trust people. She controlled them. What Emily could not see was that Victoria was reaching the exact same conclusion about her. Later that evening, a television report played inside the Mercer estate. The screen showed Ryan Cole smiling beside prominent business leaders. The announcer revealed that Ryan was expected to receive one of the industry's highest honors. Ethan immediately changed the channel. Nobody spoke. Yet the silence said everything. Somewhere outside the Mercer family, Ryan Cole was still winning. And somewhere inside the Mercer family, a wound everyone believed had healed was beginning to open again. Emily Carter had always believed that families revealed themselves through small moments rather than grand speeches. Over the following weeks, she paid close attention to the Mercer family. The more time she spent inside their world, the more she felt the presence of someone she had never met. Sarah Mercer seemed to exist everywhere. Her photograph stood beside the fireplace in the main living room. Her favorite songs still appeared on family playlists. Her recipes were mentioned during dinners. Her name surfaced naturally in conversations before an uncomfortable silence inevitably followed. It was as if the entire family lived around an invisible space nobody knew how to enter. One Sunday afternoon, Emily joined several relatives preparing food for a family gathering. She noticed everyone following recipes from memory rather than written instructions. Curious, she asked where the original recipe book was kept. The room grew strangely quiet. An older aunt finally explained that Sarah once kept a recipe journal containing years of family recipes, notes, memories, and observations. Nobody had seen it in years. Emily sensed she had touched something important. Later that evening she wandered through the Mercer estate and discovered more signs of Sarah. Notes preserved inside cookbooks. Family photographs from vacations. Awards from community projects. The more Emily learned, the less Sarah resembled the troubled figure she had quietly imagined from overheard conversations. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Ryan Cole received a discreet phone call from a former colleague. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. Old Mercer records were being reviewed. Ryan remained calm. He thanked the caller and ended the conversation. Then he began making calls of his own. Former advisors received invitations to lunch. Retired executives were contacted. Professional relationships that had been dormant for years suddenly became active again. Ryan did not sound nervous. He sounded prepared. He had spent years protecting a carefully constructed reputation and had no intention of losing it now. Back at the Mercer estate, Emily found herself growing increasingly frustrated with Victoria. Every interaction felt formal. Every conversation seemed measured. Every act of kindness arrived wrapped inside caution. Emily interpreted it as judgment. To her, Victoria looked like a woman who believed trust should always be earned and never freely given. What Emily could not see was that Victoria often stood alone in Sarah's old study after everyone went to sleep. One night she opened another preserved recipe page. Sarah's handwriting covered the margins with jokes, corrections, and playful comments. Near the bottom of the page a younger Sarah had written, "Mom says patience is an ingredient. I still think she is making that up." Victoria smiled despite herself. For a brief moment the years disappeared. The family felt whole again. Then the memory faded, replaced by the same unanswered question that had haunted her for more than a decade. If Sarah had truly been trying to protect the family, why had nobody listened when she was still speaking? The first real fracture appeared during a Mercer governance meeting held inside a glass-walled conference room overlooking the city. Emily had attended enough family functions to recognize the pattern. Sarah's name surfaced frequently, but nobody ever stayed with it long enough to tell the whole story. That afternoon, while attorneys discussed succession structures and family protections, Emily finally decided to ask the question everyone else seemed determined to avoid. She looked toward Victoria and quietly asked whether Sarah would have supported the same contracts now being placed in front of her. The effect was immediate. Conversations stopped. Papers remained frozen in midair. Several executives lowered their eyes. Ethan looked uncomfortable. Victoria's expression did not change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. After a long silence, Victoria simply replied that Sarah was not part of the discussion. Then she moved the meeting forward. Emily sat quietly for the remainder of the session, but humiliation settled heavily inside her chest. She had not intended to cause a confrontation. Yet somehow she felt as though she had broken an unwritten family rule. Later that evening she stood alone on a balcony overlooking the Mercer estate. For the first time she wondered if she would ever truly belong here. Everyone spoke about family, loyalty, and trust, but nobody seemed willing to tell the truth about the person whose absence still shaped every room in the house. Meanwhile, Victoria sat alone inside her office reviewing old correspondence from Mercer archives. What began as a routine search slowly turned into something else. Buried among years of reports and memoranda, she discovered references to meetings Sarah had attended shortly before Ryan's downfall. The notes were brief, almost insignificant, but one detail caught her attention. Sarah had raised questions regarding financial inconsistencies months before anyone else publicly acknowledged a problem. Victoria read the document twice. Then a third time. Across the country, Ryan Cole continued making quiet phone calls. One retired executive who had previously agreed to meet with Mercer representatives suddenly canceled. Another stopped responding altogether. A third politely declined involvement. No threats were made. No dramatic confrontations occurred. Yet doors that had been opening began quietly closing. Ryan understood influence better than most people. He knew that preventing a conversation was often easier than winning one. A few days later, Victoria arranged an interview with a former Mercer advisor who had worked closely with Ryan years earlier. The meeting lasted less than 15 minutes. The advisor appeared nervous, answered questions vaguely, and ended the conversation early. As Victoria watched him leave, she sensed something she had not felt in years. Resistance. Someone was actively trying to keep the past buried. Back at the estate, Emily found herself staring at a framed photograph of Sarah. She studied the smile, the posture, the confidence in her eyes. The woman in the picture did not look fragile. She did not look unreliable. For reasons she could not explain, Emily suddenly felt less interested in discovering what Sarah had done and more interested in understanding why nobody seemed willing to hear what Sarah had been trying to say. The deeper Victoria searched, the less certain she became about everything she thought she knew. Mercer Archives occupied an entire floor beneath the company headquarters, a climate-controlled maze containing decades of correspondence, reports, legal reviews, and family records. Most executives rarely entered the space. Victoria had spent nearly every evening there for the past week. On one particular night she opened a box labeled Internal Advisory Communications and discovered a sequence of emails that immediately captured her attention. The messages were more than 12 years old. Sarah had written them. In calm, professional language, she questioned several unusual transactions connected to projects Ryan Cole oversaw. There was no emotional language. No accusations. No panic. Only questions. Yet attached responses from various advisors repeatedly described Sarah as worried, stressed, overly concerned, and emotionally invested. Victoria sat frozen beneath the harsh archive lights. The contrast disturbed her. Sarah's actual words sounded measured and thoughtful. The descriptions attached to her sounded like someone else entirely. Meanwhile, Emily continued trying to understand the family she hoped to join. During a lunch with Ethan, she confessed how excluded she often felt whenever Sarah's name surfaced. Ethan admitted that even he struggled to understand what had happened. He had spent years avoiding conversations about the past because every discussion eventually led to pain. Emily listened carefully. For the first time she wondered whether Victoria's distance was not arrogance but fear. The possibility unsettled her because it challenged everything she had assumed. Across town, Ryan Cole attended interviews celebrating his expected leadership award. Reporters praised his business achievements and philanthropic work. Investors applauded his vision. Publicly, his future appeared stronger than ever. Privately, however, Ryan remained focused on Mercer activities. Through professional connections he learned that archive reviews were expanding. Within days several important records requested by Mercer representatives became unexpectedly difficult to locate. Access permissions changed. Storage requests stalled. Administrative delays multiplied. Nothing dramatic happened. Yet progress slowed everywhere. Victoria noticed immediately. When she requested additional files connected to Sarah's early concerns, an archivist informed her that portions of the material appeared incomplete. The explanation sounded reasonable. It also felt wrong. Later that evening Victoria uncovered another document buried inside an unrelated folder. It referenced a meeting Sarah attended months before Ryan's public downfall. According to the summary, Sarah had recommended a full review of specific financial relationships connected to Ryan's projects. The recommendation had never been implemented. Victoria read the page repeatedly. A painful question began taking shape. What if Sarah had not been reacting to a problem after it happened? What if she had seen it coming before everyone else? Back at the Mercer estate, Emily wandered into Sarah's former study and stopped before a wall of photographs. Looking at Sarah's smiling face, she suddenly realized something important. Nobody in the family ever described Sarah as dishonest. Nobody called her selfish. Nobody questioned her love for the family. Yet somehow everyone had learned to doubt her when it mattered most. And for the first time, Emily began wondering whether the true mystery was not what Ryan had done. The true mystery might be why nobody listened to Sarah when she was trying to warn them. The deeper Victoria Mercer searched, the less the story made sense. What had begun as a simple review of old Mercer records slowly became an obsession. For nearly 2 weeks she spent every evening buried inside company archives long after most employees had gone home. Thousands of emails. Meeting summaries. Advisory reports. Internal memorandums. Financial reviews. Calendar records. The volume was overwhelming, yet Victoria continued searching because a pattern had begun to emerge. Sarah Mercer appeared everywhere. Sometimes only in a single sentence buried inside a 50-page report. Sometimes in a forgotten meeting note. Sometimes in a recommendation nobody acted upon. At first, the discoveries seemed insignificant. Then they became impossible to ignore. Sarah had been asking questions years before anyone else recognized there was a problem. She questioned unusual transactions. She questioned unexplained delays. She questioned relationships Ryan Cole maintained with outside advisors. More importantly, she questioned them calmly. Victoria reviewed email after email expecting to find the emotional instability everyone remembered. Instead, she found professionalism. Precision. Patience. Sarah rarely accused anyone of wrongdoing. She simply asked questions nobody wanted to answer. The contradiction disturbed Victoria more with each passing day. The woman preserved inside the records did not resemble the woman people described afterward. One evening Victoria spread dozens of documents across the dining room table and began connecting dates. The pattern finally revealed itself. Every time Sarah raised concerns, someone redirected the conversation away from the concern and toward Sarah herself. Emotional. Overwhelmed. Reactive. Difficult. The same words appeared repeatedly across years of correspondence. Ryan rarely attacked Sarah directly. Instead, he planted small doubts. A quiet observation during a meeting. A casual remark to an advisor. A suggestion that Sarah might be carrying too much stress. None of it sounded cruel. Yet over time the effect became devastating. People stopped evaluating Sarah's warnings. They started evaluating Sarah. Victoria leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. For years she believed Ryan's greatest crime involved money, influence, and business decisions. Now she understood something far worse. Ryan had stolen Sarah's credibility before he stole anything else. Emily Carter continued helping review archived digital records nearby. Hours passed in silence before she suddenly froze. She had uncovered an inactive folder connected to Sarah's old company email account. Most of the messages contained routine correspondence. Then one subject line caught her attention. The recipient was Victoria Mercer. The date was only weeks before everything collapsed. Emily opened the message and quietly turned the screen toward Victoria. For several seconds Victoria simply stared. Then she began reading. Mom, I know you trust him. I know you think I am overreacting. But I need you to trust me just once. Please let me explain. If I am wrong, I will apologize for all of it. But if I am right, we are running out of time. Victoria stopped breathing. Her eyes drifted to the corner of the screen. The email still carried the same status it had carried 12 years earlier. Unread. She checked the timestamp once. Then again. She remembered seeing the notification arrive. She remembered telling herself she would respond later after a meeting. Later that afternoon became later that evening. Later became next week. Next week became another crisis. Later never came. Emily continued searching and uncovered something even worse. Calendar invitations. Follow-up emails. Requests for private conversations. Sarah had not reached out once. She had reached out again and again. Victoria finally understood the truth that shattered her completely. Sarah did not fail to explain. Sarah never stopped trying. Tears filled Victoria's eyes as she stared at the unread message. Ryan had convinced her to doubt the one person who had been desperately trying to protect the family all along. And because of that doubt, she never opened the message her daughter needed her to read. The truth should have brought Victoria Mercer peace. Instead, it became the most painful burden she had ever carried. After discovering Sarah's unread email, Victoria returned to the archives searching for answers. What she found only deepened the wound. Emily Carter helped recover additional records connected to Sarah's old accounts. Calendar invitations, follow-up messages, voicemails, meeting requests, private notes. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Sarah had not reached out once. She had reached out constantly. For months she had been trying to speak with her mother. Victoria began constructing a timeline across the walls of Sarah's study. On one side she placed Sarah's messages. On the other side she placed her own responses. The result was devastating. "Can we talk privately?" After the board meeting. "I need you to look at something. Next week. Please trust me long enough to explain. We will discuss it later. There is something wrong here. Not now." The timeline stretched across years of memory. Sarah moved forward. Victoria delayed. Sarah warned. Victoria postponed. Sarah persisted. Victoria waited. None of it came from cruelty. That was what made it unbearable. Victoria had loved her daughter. She had wanted to protect her family. She had believed she was being responsible. Yet fear, pride, certainty, and trust in the wrong person had quietly shaped every decision. As the timeline expanded, Victoria finally saw the full truth. Ryan Cole had manipulated the family, but he had not acted alone. Every time Sarah tried to raise concerns, Victoria helped preserve the narrative Ryan wanted people to believe. She kept asking for more proof. More patience. Better timing. Meanwhile, Ryan continued strengthening his position. Victoria stared at the wall of messages for hours. The room felt smaller with every realization. Sarah had not failed to explain. Sarah had explained repeatedly. Sarah had not failed to fight. Sarah had never stopped fighting. Tears filled Victoria's eyes as she looked at one final calendar request Sarah sent only days before everything fell apart. The invitation had been declined because of a scheduling conflict. Victoria remembered the meeting she attended instead. She could not remember a single thing that had been discussed there. But she remembered Sarah's invitation. She remembered deciding it could wait. Quietly, with nobody else in the room, Victoria finally spoke. The words she had been avoiding since the investigation began. "Sarah kept trying to save us. I kept asking her to wait." The sentence lingered in the silence. For the first time, the emotional question was no longer whether Ryan was guilty. Victoria already knew he was. The question that terrified her now was far more personal. How could she live with the knowledge that while her daughter was desperately trying to protect the family, she had been too afraid to listen? Meanwhile, Ryan's influence continued growing. A leadership foundation formally confirmed his upcoming award. Witnesses withdrew. Records became harder to obtain. To the outside world, Ryan appeared stronger than ever. But inside the Mercer estate, something had fundamentally changed. Emily no longer saw Victoria as controlling. She saw a woman carrying a level of regret almost impossible to bear. And for the first time, understanding began replacing judgment. For the first time since the investigation began, it felt as though Ryan Cole might actually win. The Leadership Award ceremony was only weeks away. News coverage intensified. Industry organizations praised his accomplishments. Former business partners publicly endorsed him. Every article seemed to strengthen the story Ryan had spent years building around himself. At the same time, the Mercer investigation continued losing momentum. Witnesses disappeared behind polite refusals. Records remained delayed. Conversations that once seemed promising suddenly reached dead ends. The truth existed, but proving it felt increasingly impossible. Victoria spent long nights staring at evidence spread across her dining room table. She knew Sarah had tried to warn them. She knew Ryan had manipulated perceptions. Yet knowledge and proof were not the same thing. The possibility that Sarah might never be fully restored haunted her more than she wanted to admit. One evening, Ethan finally reached his breaking point. He found Victoria sitting alone among stacks of documents and legal files. For years he had avoided difficult conversations. Harmony had always felt safer than conflict. If everyone remained calm, perhaps old wounds would eventually fade on their own. But watching his mother suffer convinced him that silence had become its own form of damage. He sat across from her and asked a simple question. Was all of this making her feel better? Victoria had no answer. Ethan took a deep breath and said something neither of them would ever forget. Peace is not the same thing as healing. The words settled heavily between them. Ethan admitted that the family had spent years avoiding pain instead of confronting it. They avoided talking about Sarah. Avoided talking about Ryan. Avoided talking about mistakes. They called it moving on. In reality, they had simply stopped looking at the wound. The conversation spread through the family over the following days. One by one, relatives began sharing memories they had buried for years. An aunt remembered Sarah asking difficult questions during a family dinner. A cousin recalled receiving emails Sarah sent about concerns nobody wanted to discuss. A former advisor admitted he had dismissed Sarah's warnings because Ryan always sounded more confident. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Ryan had not succeeded alone. He succeeded because good people chose certainty over discomfort. Accountability slowly expanded beyond Victoria. The entire family began confronting its role in what happened. Meanwhile, Emily watched everything unfold with growing humility. Months earlier she had judged Victoria almost immediately. She believed she understood her. Now she recognized how incomplete that judgment had been. Fear had shaped Victoria's behavior far more than pride ever had. The realization changed Emily. Curiosity replaced certainty. Empathy replaced frustration. For the first time she felt less focused on being accepted by the Mercer family and more focused on understanding them. Yet despite these breakthroughs, the external reality remained unchanged. Ryan's award ceremony moved forward. Public support continued growing. The investigation seemed weaker than ever. And as the date approached, Victoria found herself terrified of one possibility above all others. Not that Ryan would be honored, but that Sarah's voice might be lost again just when the family had finally started listening. 4. Several days, the Mercer family lived inside a silence that felt almost final. The Leadership Awards ceremony was approaching. Ryan Cole's name appeared across business publications, and every attempt to strengthen the case seemed to weaken instead. Witnesses who had once sounded willing became cautious. Archived records remained delayed. Former advisors spoke carefully, as if each sentence had been polished by someone else before reaching the Mercers. Victoria spent long hours at the dining room table surrounded by documents, but for the first time since the search began, she wondered whether truth alone would be enough. Sarah had tried. Sarah had written. Sarah had asked to be heard. And still, 12 years later, Ryan's version of the past seemed stronger in public than Sarah's truth. One evening, Victoria quietly closed the folder in front of her and said she did not know if they could prove it. No one answered immediately. Ethan looked down at the table, fighting the same fear. Emily watched Victoria's face and understood that this was not surrender to Ryan. It was exhaustion from carrying a truth that might never be recognized. The next morning, Emily returned alone to the list of old storage references connected to Mercer properties. Most led nowhere. One facility had changed ownership twice. Another had no matching inventory. A third number had been disconnected for years. By late afternoon she almost stopped. Then a storage company outside San Jose returned her call about unclaimed archived property linked to Sarah Mercer's name. 3 days before Ryan's ceremony, several boxes arrived at Mercer Capital. Among them was a worn leather-bound recipe journal with Sarah's name written inside the cover. For a moment nobody spoke. Victoria opened it with trembling hands. The pages contained recipes, grocery lists, family memories, jokes, observations, meeting notes, names, dates, and reflections written over many years. Sarah had treated the journal as both a cookbook and a private record of her life. As Victoria turned page after page, the pattern became undeniable. Entries written by Sarah aligned with documents recovered from Mercer archives. Conversations described in the journal matched meeting records. Concerns Sarah noted privately appeared months before corresponding corporate events occurred. Sarah had not been guessing. She had been paying attention. Emily sat beside Victoria reading portions of the journal. At one point she discovered an exchange written across several recipe pages. Sarah had scribbled, "Mom thinks she is right again." Beneath it, written days later in different handwriting, Victoria had replied, "Because I usually am." Several pages later Sarah added, "She is probably right. Do not tell her I said that." Emily laughed unexpectedly. Then tears filled her eyes. The journal revealed something more honest than perfection. Families argued. Families misunderstood one another. Yet love remained present beneath all of it. Meanwhile, mounting evidence forced the Leadership Foundation overseeing Ryan's award to initiate a formal ethics review. Ryan arrived confident and composed. He had spent years controlling narratives. He expected another victory. Instead, the story began slipping away from him piece by piece. Witnesses stepped forward. Former employees described how Sarah's concerns had been minimized. Archived records surfaced. Journal entries aligned with documented timelines. For the first time in years, Sarah's voice was being heard without interruption. By the end of the hearing, the central question was no longer whether Ryan had manipulated events. The evidence strongly suggested he had. The deeper revelation was that Sarah Mercer had been telling the truth all along. And after 12 years of silence, the family was finally listening. The truth finally became stronger than fear. The formal review that Ryan Cole had entered expecting to control became the moment he lost control forever. Sarah Mercer's notes aligned with archived records. Witness statements supported dates she had documented years earlier. The recovered recipe journal confirmed details that many believed had disappeared with time. Piece by piece, the narrative Ryan spent years protecting unraveled in front of the very people whose admiration had helped sustain it. He was not removed because of rumors. He was not removed because of revenge. He was removed because the truth could no longer be ignored. The industry honor he expected to receive was withdrawn. Organizations distanced themselves. Former supporters stopped defending him. For years Ryan believed he had outsmarted everyone. In the end, the thing he valued most was the thing he lost. His carefully protected reputation. Yet inside the Mercer family, nobody celebrated. The victory felt too complicated for celebration. Ryan's exposure restored Sarah's credibility, but it could not return the years they had lost. In the weeks that followed, family members began sharing stories they had not discussed in years. Conversations replaced silence. Memories replaced assumptions. Vulnerability replaced certainty. Ethan Mercer found himself leading many of those conversations. Emily Carter no longer felt like an outsider waiting for acceptance. She felt like part of a family learning how to listen. One evening Victoria Mercer gathered everyone around the dining room table. The old contract sat beside Sarah's recipe journal. For years the contract had represented safety, protection, control. Now Victoria understood what it had truly represented. Fear. Without hesitation, she tore the contract into pieces. Nobody applauded. Nobody needed to. The gesture spoke for itself. Later that night, after the family dinner ended and the house grew quiet, Victoria returned alone to the kitchen. A single lamp illuminated the familiar wooden table where Sarah had spent countless evenings writing recipes and notes. Victoria opened the recipe journal one final time. She slowly turned page after page, smiling at handwritten comments, ingredient substitutions, and small family jokes. Then something slipped from between two pages and landed softly on the table. It was a folded recipe card she had never seen before. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. The front contained a simple waffle recipe. On the back Sarah had written a message. If you are reading this years from now, I hope we finally stopped arguing about recipes. I hope you are still burning the waffles. I hope Ethan still pretends he does not like cinnamon when he actually does. Most of all, I hope you know I never stopped loving you. Love, Sarah. Victoria covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. For years she had seen Sarah through grief, through guilt, through unanswered questions, through regret. But now something changed. For the first time in a very long time, she no longer saw a witness. She no longer saw a victim. She no longer saw a wound. She saw her daughter. The girl who teased her about recipes. The sister who knew Ethan better than he admitted. The woman who never stopped loving her family even when they failed to understand her. Victoria smiled through her tears and gently closed the journal. Outside, the Mercer home remained exactly where it had always been. But inside, everything was different. Ryan's version of the past no longer lived there. Sarah's truth did. And as the kitchen light glowed softly against the pages of the journal, it felt as though Sarah had returned home one final time.